Okay, good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out what the future of smart buildings or smarter buildings is all about. So good to have you with us. Panelists are listed on Monday Live. If you wonder who we are, just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post questions and comments on chat. And again, just a reminder, this deck is available on mondaylive.org, where you actually see this deck embedded, as well as a link to open it in a new tab. On the embedded one, the links kind of may or may not work, kind of depends on what the links are. So there's kind of options on that front. And so this being June, we have been we are talking about this sort of notion that automation is not the same thing as smart, which has instigated some interesting conversations, which we're going to continue. Today, on that theme, we're going to be talking about what the criteria for a viable solution looks like. Having last week talked about sort of understanding what the problem set is. So really looking forward to that. But before that, hand it over to Ken for some news from Automated Buildings.
Thanks, Anto. Just to continue a little bit of our Wednesday chat, we started talking about the TLDR factor, which is too long, did not read. And I think we're all suffering as an industry from that, is that we have the ability to generate an incredible amount of medium, but no one has the time to read it. So I think our task, certainly an Automated Buildings task, is to try and summarize some of that stuff so people can kind of pick through it at a speedier rate to try and find out if they wish to delve in and invest the time to read this too long information. That being said, we've attempted to do a quick summary of last Monday's session, and we've been trying to do that with a bunch of YouTubes, and we've been using AI, and naturally it has to be edited, but we're basically heading in that direction, and I think that's sort of something as an industry. And I think anytime you write one of those too long posts, I think you are obligated to spend as much time as you did writing the post, writing the pull tag. First thing, everybody looks at the title. The next thing they look at is the pull tag. And what started this discussion is we've got a great title in the fact that automation does not equal smart. And then the killer one is that smart buildings don't exist. So the tagline has to be pretty powerful to basically try and quickly explain that. And I think that's kind of a pattern that we have to work through. There's a couple other things going on. Of course, everybody, as Monday Live, is getting prepared for IBCon. Our editorial chair, my daughter Carrie, is going to be in Tampa, and she's speaking with Scott on the talent gap. So that's interesting. Looks like IBCon and Realcon have been struggling a bit to keep their records up to speed.
Are you still there?
Pardon?
You froze? Or did I freeze?
We still hear him.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
okay. Anyway, so yeah, so that's just been, we've known about that for quite a while, but it's just official on the site now. Another thing that's come across is QR codes. I think we're all fairly familiar with those and how we've used them to tag equipment and connect it to the cut sheet and stuff. But the new concept is that these QR codes could now be linked to the clouds, and we then have a contractor being able to read the history of what actually happened yesterday. So if somebody actually modifies a piece of equipment or a panel, upgrades it, puts a new version in, if I come to it the next day and they're having troubles, I can hold my phone up and it'll tell me that somebody was there at 1 o'clock yesterday and they completely reloaded the database and by the way, they forgot to add this ad or something. So it's an interesting tie-in. And then if you kind of let your mind roll on it, the power of a QR code connected to the cloud, connected to AI thinking becomes kind of a powerful weapon in streamlining building maintenance and actually our industry. So by simply sticking a tag on anything, you can direct, and we kind of jump over all of the infrastructure that we traditionally have had in between that. So yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting concept. Back to the bridging the talent gap. That's going to be an interesting thing. If you click on that bottom one, you'll see that we've gone to a bunch of resources and some of the meetings we've had before and tried to summarize the salient points out of that. Embedded in there is also the hybrid freelance model that seems to be evolving in the industry as well. So other than that, back to you, Anto.
Yeah, the QR code's actually interesting. I remember when they first came out and I really didn't understand why anybody would need them. And I've just spent a few days in London, and it seems that QR code is the new decor around London. They're everywhere to do everything from parking your car to buying stuff and pretty much everything. It's quite amazing how it does. And arguably, QR codes could be seen to be a cloud native thing because basically what they contain is a link. And most things that happen in cloud native is all about links. So interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, to Ken's point about logging into the system and seeing what's going on. When you go to most airport restaurants nowadays, there's no one taking your order, but there is a QR code that you take your camera to and pulls up a menu and you order. You can not only get the menu, you order from there, and everything is transacted in that manner. So I think it'd be a natural for us to make that part of the functionality for the IBB.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also falls into the too long do not read. Is the fact is we don't read anything. We basically we actually start to look for these images, and we don't even want to talk. Who owns this? He who owns the QR code basically owns the panel, I think. So every QR code you have to make have to be bigger than the last one, so it sticks over top of it.
All right. The session in Tampa is coming up. It's actually next week now. We have one more Monday Live before it, but Rick, do you want to speak to this a bit?
Yeah, again, as we sort of said last week, the room is filling up fast, and not making that up. So there's, our sort of provocative agenda is apparently being well received. Either that, or we're gonna have a lot of stuff thrown at us while we're up there on stage. But we think that the message is actually resonating with, the tagline that we maybe don't get to quick enough is that right here on this page you see that says, if I can put my glasses on to read it, when data is invisible to AI, smart buildings don't exist. It's a little bit of a clarification on what we mean by automation is not equal to smart, and that, as that tagline says, if we don't have data, we can't do AI, and we're probably not making our lives easy on ourselves. So that theme and at that location with that audience is looking like it's coming together well, and we're looking forward to the seeing y'all there. And yeah, a week from yes,
Wednesday. Yeah, that's cool. And there is a live stream link. I'm actually going to post it on chat as well, so you can all have it. But it's all on here on this slide. So that will be a way for you to watch if you're not in Tampa. Looking forward to that.
Do we have any updated numbers as far as how many have signed up?
Yeah, it's filling up the room. It's pretty solid on that front.
So, and the room holds what, 140?
Yeah.
Yep. So we're almost there.
Okay, so really looking forward to that next week. The link board as normal. I don't think anything's changed on that. Any other perspectives anybody want to bring up before we move on? And seeing nothing, let us move on to the topic of the month, which is automation is not the same as smart. And this is kind of the structure of this month. Last week, we were really talking about trying to understand the problem, and this is the whole sort of there are no smart buildings kind of concept, which is all about the data. So that I think we did that really well. Today, we're going to be talking about the criteria for a viable solution, and next week we're going to talk about the cloud native forward and the cloud native way forward, and then after Rollcom, we'll have an open discussion and probably do a bit of a debrief for those that were not there. So looking forward to that as well. And this is really a summary of what we talked about last week about smart buildings don't exist. These are the points that the definition is not clear what it is. And the industry is fragmented in silos. And while the world is data-driven, as we were talking about with QR codes, parking your car and everything else, in real estate, data is the largest untapped value right now that's potentially representing a significant amount of value. So that's really sort of the perspective that came out, and very much what we're expected to be discussing in Tampa. And proprietary solutions make it hard and expensive, and really sort of there's this is the time for some consensus, for openness, and for doing it right. And we must do it now, because if we don't, I'm not sure who else would. So leave it at that. Is that a pretty accurate summary of last week? You know, I was on and off because I was having travel problems. Anybody want to comment on this?
I think that's a pretty good summary, and our summary coincides with that, I think, very much so.
Mhm.
The data part is the missing part. Our connection to data is bumpy at the best.
Okay,
Or
so let's
expensive
move.
or proprietary, right?
Right. All right, so let's move on then. So this week we're going to be talking about criteria for a viable solution, and we've sort of done some preliminary sort of thinking about this, and I'm going to put up a list of what we think the sort of the areas that we can talk about today. This is the list. Make silos so that they are interoperable. It's sort of one way of thinking about dealing with the silo issue. Make sure that whatever we do is AI fluent or can fit in with whatever happens with it in the AI thing, which is obviously still very, very new. It has to be open, it has to be secure to the zero trust level, it has to be standardized, and finally it has to be cloud native, as per the CNCF sort of architecture that is evolving, that everybody's using around the world. So with that, let's sort of dig into these. Anybody have any specific specific perspective that they want to dig into at this point?
I'll start, since I'm supposed to be speaking on this some at the panel. When we talk about standardization, I think it's very important to understand that as an industry, through Landmark, through BACnet, we've been working for years to standardize data definitions and information. And lots of folks have come along with IoT solutions, MQTT, other things over the years that basically have had proprietary data definitions. And in small standalone applications, that's not a big deal. But in large, long-term campus situations with lots of material that's going to be around for a long time, the standardization is absolutely crucial to having this stuff work, because it's really standardization over time rather than, can I get this thing working at this juncture in time? The next thing I'd like to point out is on cybersecurity. There are lots and lots of people that are attacking cybersecurity problems right now. But in the IT world, they often treat everything as if it's its own PC. And the deeply embedded devices we have here are not PCs, they're deeply embedded devices. And as such, a lot of the techniques that have been developed in IT to police personal computer end devices don't work for us. And that's why, as an industry, we've spent the last 15 years developing zero trust technology to go down into all of our embedded devices and provide that level of security with both authorization and authentication to all of the end devices. And I think that's going to be very important too. I'll leave it at that. Anto.
Yeah, this standardization, I mean, I guess one of the issues is, how does the standardization sort of make the inter-silo stuff happen? Not, I don't mean specifically what the bits and bytes are, because the standardization you were referring to, Jim, which is actually, you know, the history of how we've got to where we are, is arguably within a silo.
That's correct.
Because it is within a silo. So we've done that. So we know how to do that. We even know how to, you know, how to sort of resolve multiple standards and sort of dealing with that. We understand that. So in a way, we're talking about a different type of standardization that is much more sort of across silo, which is it's just very different. So does that resonate with people?
It does resonate. And in fact, I would argue that when we're trying to identify what the value propositions are across silos, it helps us to understand the use cases so that we can look at how to represent that data. And I think that coming down the pipe with the cloud native computing stuff and the IBB stuff we're looking at, I think that using connection profiles or other techniques that are self-documenting is the way forward. However, you have to have a healthy respect for the problem that you're trying to solve, so that you can basically maintain the integrity of that information as it moves from silo to silo.
It
So-
just sort of occurred to me, just one point, that in a way we were talking about QR codes and things. That is very much a standardization up at that sort of system level, up at the user level, because the QR code is a technology that is being applied, that is being used for all sorts of things, for parking your car, to buying eggs and bacon at the airport, and all sorts of other things, right? So it's almost like it's the same type of standardization that is going across silos, because yeah, it just occurred to me. Sorry, Steve.
It is, but I would point out that the QR code has no metadata or no understanding of the information that's going directly. That is application specific every time, right? You can encode some of it in there, but the encoding of the information into the QR code you use is very important if you want it to be interoperable and usable by
Yes.
other people.
Yes. Steve.
So, Rick and Anto, you know, from a CNCF perspective, in terms of what the foundation is, how it's solving this problem from an IT perspective, okay, with respect to data. So you've got, you know, a lot of, for example, SQL databases out there, and as well as, you know, traditional cloud type databases from Amazon or Google, etc. And my assumption is that those databases are accessible to AI interaction. I'll call it that. Okay. So whereas the databases that we have in our industry are often very proprietary and live in embedded devices, as Jim referred to earlier. So do we have a clearer picture of what might need to be done at the database level to make, from a CNCF perspective, do we have a sense of where we need to take our industry to make it possible for us to more readily adopt the methodologies that are in CNCF for the IT world?
Steve, once the data is accessible, assuming all the data on site is accessible, it's not. Surely once it hits, your cloud native solution, then the data is normalized, or is one format that is accessible, isn't it?
Well, that's my question. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, so I think I think you hit the nail there, Roger. The whole idea of looking at the cloud native way of solving this is that's the point where everything becomes the same.
Right.
Right. And at that point, when I'm scanning the parking meter in Kingston last night, I have no clue and I have no care whether it's a SQL database at the other end of it, of what I'm doing or not. It matters not to me, and should be the same for what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is, making things interoperable between silos, so that when two silos have a need to exchange information about doing something, whatever that is, whether it's DR or whatever. The use case is the thing that defines what happens. What actually happens at either end can and should be whatever those silos need to be. So I think that it's kind of an interesting question, but the whole point of all of this is to actually abstract the standardization.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom, but I'm just asking, when we abstract, we have a standard, a well-known standard or approach that is going to be recognized by in the IT world. We're doing it in such a manner so that it's going to be immediately recognizable how we are storing and making the data accessible. That's what I'm asking.
So at a high level, to answer the question about does the CNCF help to answer the question of how do I get access to the data? Yeah, absolutely. So in the past, we had to move all the data. We kept all the data in one place. And we did all the processing in one place. And we accessed both the data and the processing remotely. What CNCF is describing is a new sort of architecture where the data and the applications can be anywhere, and the processing can be anywhere. So it's kind of a high level answer to say that the question of where is the data becomes irrelevant. So the interfaces between systems becomes the most important thing. And the ability to search and to be able to find and be found becomes really important in a different way than what it's been in the past. And I know that sounds high level, but that's really what the cloud native architectures are about, is about the making it irrelevant as to where the computing is happening, where the data is stored. And that just releases a lot of flexibility on how architectures work in the future, new architectures.
And that is how a lot of the CNCF technologies work. It's all about that. It's all about finding stuff, which, QR code, going back to that again, is I don't think it's a CNCF thing. I'm sure it's not, but it's basically doing the same thing. Right. So all of that, there's a significant amount of technology that's already there. Obviously, with the IBB and connection profile, that creates another sort of some additional tools in our toolbox.
the evolution of computing architectures has actually been kind of slow, but we're at a point where what CNCF represents, what cloud native represents in different variations is just a remarkably big step, you know, in the evolution of computing architectures. And so it does a little bit of a rethinking, which we're going to try and make, you know, we're trying to make it simple to understand in the TLDR mode. But it is as big of a change in paradigm as what maybe client server was, or mainframe with terminals, you know, to move into local area networks was. This is a significant change in the way computing happens.
And to tap into what Ken previously sort of commented on, the change that we're seeing here is as big of a change as the change from from pneumatic to DDC, right? And if you go back and compare those two technologies, they're obviously very, very different, right? So it's a different difference, but the magnitude of difference, I think, is the same. But all of the tools are there. The reason why you could create the DDCs back in the 70s and 80s is because people were making microprocessors and you know, all of the components and all of the pieces. And the reason we can do IBB is because there's a lot of cloud native pieces that we can use right now.
You know, I just thought it's something else that should be a criteria for a viable solution. It's like, don't make Amazon, Microsoft, or Google mad. It should be a criteria. Be compatible with the monsters in the IT midway, right? And that's another key part, that when we're talking about CNCF, we're not flying in the face of or being contrary to what the big IT cloud vendors are doing. We're showing a way to be able to use interoperable pieces and then be able to leverage what they're providing. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, in order to achieve standardization and ultimately to achieve interoperability between systems that normally would not speak to each other in their silos. Tracy, can you chime in on this? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get to the unmute button. No, I'm listening to all this. It's really interesting, and thinking about kind of a real world situation. You know, there's a few things that are just factual that we'll have to deal with, like silos exist. So we've got to find a way to work with and around silos, right? At the same time, when we're doing new implementations, we got to make sure that they go in, you know, open, interoperable, and, you know, follow the new definitions that we're talking about here a little bit more. But
So
otherwise, I'm on board with everything that's been said so far. Sounds good.
So we have open here listed, and standardization and interoperability, right? Three things that I think you just now put into one sentence. How different are they, and what's the difference between standardization and open?
That's a loaded question, actually, a little bit, because they go hand in hand to a great degree, but at the same time, they're different. So open, interoperable, doesn't necessarily have to follow a standard per se, whereas, you know, the idea behind a standard is everybody's doing it the exact same way, or in an understandable, well-defined way, let's say. So I think that there is a lot of gray space between where we are today versus where we are in 2030, let's say. In that gray space in there is, how do we deal with our existing systems that are deployed? How do we make siloed proprietary architectures open and consumable to AI, for instance, or other applications? So I think those are kind of the important things for the next 5 years to focus on, is getting through this area, between what we have in existence today versus an ideal situation we've deployed and have new architectures, new platforms, new systems out there.
So there's a question, is that if we go back to what Rick said, and the data can be sat anywhere, right? It's doesn't matter where it's at. When you start looking and saying, okay, it could be on an edge device, because if it's connected, but it needs both the standardized and open things to work hand in hand, because if you like, the format of the data needs to be standardized on that edge device as it would be in the cloud. But it also needs not only technically but commercially to be open, because anybody should be able to provide, a similar piece of equipment, whomever it comes from, and be serviced by anybody else. So there's two elements to open, both technical and commercial. But to me, kind of open and standardized work together when you're saying the data should be could be sat anywhere. And if an edge device is one of those things, then you need both of those for sure.
Well, we're already in a situation now where, data is kind of anywhere, right? I don't know or care where my data is necessarily. So we're a lot of this stuff we already have in place, and we're moving that way. I think I was thinking a while ago when you guys were first talking about smart buildings don't exist and automation doesn't equal smart. Well, you know what? 10 years ago, automation did equal smart. So really what we're talking about is an evolution here to the next level of smart. So, along with that are all of these things that we're talking about here. This list is really pretty strong in terms of what's needed to make this happen. But part of what nobody has really addressed in this whole thing, and we don't have it really on here, are the forces out there that are delaying or proactively fighting against this, right? I think it's important that we at least say that out loud, that there are business interests that are contrary to this vision, put it that way. And to me, in the experience that I had with Lawnmark, for instance, Jim probably, and anyone who's been associated with BACnet probably saw the same thing. It's those forces that slowed the progress towards this vision more than anything else. It's not technology. It's not that we don't know how to create a standard or define an open architecture or create an interoperable building box. It's a business problem, right? How do you guys feel about that? Do you?
I'd like to comment a bit on that. As Anto did the transition from pneumatics to DDC, and in those days, it seemed like we were almost leading the industry. I would like to reframe that right now, I think we're lagging the industry, lagging the cloud native and the QR and all of that. And what we need to do is we need to look at what they're doing and how they're evolving their standards, because in fact, we're becoming part of that infrastructure. And there's millions, gazillions of dollars being spent in that arena. And so I think we almost have to have full-time research figuring out how people are using cloud native AI in their business models, because every time I see one of those, I immediately see application in our industry, and it's like, wow. So the opportunities are just incredible for us to, I think, follow the trends that are occurring. Every time a parking meter turns into a QR code, and let's question why that's done. And let's take the same reasons and apply it to our industry.
You know, it's an interesting thing that you say there. A logical question might be, why did the transformation from pneumatic to digital happen? And it happened in our industry relatively quickly. And there was an overwhelming business reason. It was by choice for the most part. Nobody was trying to delay digital because there was a path and an avenue to better, faster, smarter systems at lower prices, right? And what we're dealing with here is sort of, you know, the new solution came out of a different industry, so to speak, right? Didn't come from the controls industry per se. It came from an adjacent industry in the IT world. So there's a reason the IT world went that way, and it's all about economics. We just haven't got to the point where we've realized that or admitted or accepted that yet. So we have this dichotomy right now where I think we are going to have one group of companies, people in our industry that see this open vision, understand the economics behind it, want that to happen, a voluntary migration, let's call it, versus an involuntary, forced migration, so to speak, which inevitably will happen, in my belief. But the question is, what do we do to kind of speed things, grease the skids, speed things up to get at least the voluntary part to happen sooner than later, right?
Actually, in a forced migration, I love that term. What do? You follow the other animals. And I think that's maybe the point we're at right now, is we have to follow the other animals that are migrating and try and find out why they're going that direction and what benefits they see. Just in simple terms.
I have a really good emotional equivalent example here on that front. So we have been on the same enterprise system for 23 years. The company came out finally and said, look, we're going to stop supporting future Windows versions here. So the end is upon us for this platform, this system. We're not going to support that anymore. It had been acquired several times and so forth. So, so we're now moving into our forced migration. And if anybody has ever gone through a migration of an ERP system, when you've got 100,000 SKUs plus in your database, and everything that goes along with that, you know that the reason that we didn't do that wasn't necessarily pure dollar driven. I mean, it is ultimately, but the pain and suffering associated with the migration of an ERP system is so large that we've been putting it off for as long as we possibly can. Even though we know the new system is going to give us new features, new benefits, eventually it will likely, you know, be a economically, even though I think the dollar amount is more, the overall economic value will be better. But having to go through this pain of migration is the challenge here, is the hurdle that's in front of us. And I can see that in our industry too. You're saying I got to change my hardware, change the way I do things, change the way I architect platforms, change my software. Oh boy, that just feels like a lot to go through, right?
But Tracy, how much of this falls, and we don't talk about it much, but how much of this falls to the people that are specifying the systems? Because, you know, going back to Ken's thing about moving from, you know, pneumatic to DDC solutions, you know, once specifiers, consultants and everyone were saying, okay, you know, the system will be DDC, that was it. You know, people couldn't offer pneumatics. And if the specifiers of systems start asking for, you know, different solutions than they've got today, that's got to be a driver, because until those guys put down on paper or whatever it is, whatever format it's going to be, but put it down to say, okay, this is how this building's going to be, I can't see how things have changed, because it's easy for people to say, yep, we do that, we offer, controllers, and we can ship stuff out to the cloud, but it won't be in the way that we want to do it until someone specifies the right way of doing this.
Which
Well,
is, I would say
Go ahead.
that's the reason that we are taking this message to Realcomm, because we want to
Yeah.
take this message to the owner community. And I know Realcomm isn't all of the owner community, it's a complex thing, but that's kind of a first step.
But a lot of the owners step back with the responsibility to a third party, which is a consultant, in a lot of instances,
Yeah.
who writes the specification.
I
Right.
think, Roger, there will come a day where people will just be specifying it. You'll have to do it. I mean, I can't imagine. I don't know what the time frame is. If it's more than 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years from now, nobody's going to be specifying anything that looks like a proprietary siloed system any longer, right? And I remember I was working in a paper mill, in college intern with the instrumentation department, and it was about the time where the switch between pneumatics and digital was going on. So in the mill, we had the majority of controls, let's call it that way, were pneumatic, but there were certainly digital systems coming in all over the place. And the instrument department was made up mostly of older guys that were in there, a few younger guys. But I'll never forget how much they bitched and complained about these damn DDC systems and how complicated and why did they have to have them. And, they were kind of dragged into the future kicking and screaming. And we're going to have that influence here too, right? Why do we need something new? What we have is good. I'm every year I come out.
Well, I
with
think
a new,
that
or
I
every
think that's where this
come out with a
I
different-
think that's where the sort of the silo thing comes in, because I think if you say everything is good, I think usually somebody that says that will be saying that in the context of a silo, right?
Absolutely.
Right,
For selfish reasons, right? For selfish reasons.
well, it's not even selfish. It's in a silo, you don't see what's outside. You don't even know
Right.
what's outside. I know that's exaggerating a bit, but it is.
No, I think you're dead on. I think the industry doesn't know what it doesn't know, right?
Yeah, and the building owners don't know that they can potentially get all of this data that can potentially improve how they operate their buildings.
Right.
Right. So the whole thing is to actually create some demand by linking it to IT, which is something that's very well understood and known by certainly large organizations.
I applaud what you're doing, taking this to Realcomm, but just as you were saying those words, I'm wondering if it's time to lobby ASHRAE to support this. I think ASHRAE would agree that BACnet has been a huge success because of a lot of people's efforts, but it definitely needs to grow. It needs to change. It needs this overarching approach. And we don't know any of the answers, but certainly we're creating a lot of the questions and stuff. And for them to weigh in and start to do some discussion on it might be worthwhile. Could you discuss or just add something to that or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of efforts going on at ASHRAE, Ken, for standardization of control sequences, metadata, other things. But as an organization, ASHRAE has a lot of trouble looking outside of its silo, and always has.
Okay.
And I think that while a lot of work has been done on smart grid building interfaces and other things, I think that that a lot of the data definitions that ASHRAE is working on will be applicable to things like maintenance management, So I think there's a lot of work being done there that's got a lot of relevance. Just how far outside of the HVAC silo it looks, my experience has taught me that it does look outside, but not that far.
Yeah, I've always defined.
Which is
Go ahead.
probably okay, because
It is.
that makes sure that the HVAC part of it, which is what the silo that ASHRAE is involved with, is good, right? That's their job, is to do that. They're not necessarily concerned with lighting or CMMS or other systems which are outside of their silo. So it is the
Those,
special.
those reach outs have been made for lighting and fire alarms and other things. And, once again, I think that that standardization is good. And I think ASHRAE is obviously the world leader at what they do, which can't be everything.
And just to put a fine point on that, I guess, or an additional point, in the past, I feel like there's been like an effort to say, well, our standard needs to be the standard, and all the rest of you need to bring your systems to me or to us. And everybody's silo, everybody was in a silo saying exactly the same thing.
Right.
My silo is the only standard that matters. And don't know what the rest of you are doing, but you need to bring your stuff to me. And finally, we're at a point where it's the interfaces between the silos or the abstractions of the silos that starts to matter. And again, you all know I'm from Iowa. We learned early that you got to make your silo open to the outside world. Otherwise, what's inside your silo rots and becomes worthless. Well, and that's probably a bad analogy. but the point is, we're now at a point where the arguments about bring all of your stuff to my silo and make you compatible with me, that's not the way and that's a big part of what CNCF allows for. And that's what we're demonstrating with the IBB, is that we're not saying bring everything to the IBB. We are kind of saying that we can make all the stuff that's in our silo available to the outside world and vice versa. And that's a subtle point or evolution.
But so in a way, the wishes of people in the silo that everything looks like their stuff is actually correct. It's just that they're not directly doing that with the other systems, right? They're just doing that through an intermediary, and the intermediary is the silo interoperation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The broker function is something, again, you learn real early, is that the middleman function, right? The market maker function is something that allows for silos to work together. And that's what we're finally getting to with in regard to technology.
That is kind of the state of the industry, I think, right now, in terms of when we look around and say, who's doing open? It's people that, a little while ago we were calling master system integrators and so forth, right? That have figured out which glue is needed to hold all the pieces together and shuffle the stuff around a little bit better, right? So, and that's going to be the case for a while, I believe, because everybody's entrenched. There are existing silos. There are business interests working against an open, interoperable vision. And it just takes time, no matter how inevitable the outcome of all this is. It's just going to take time, right? And the first step at Railcom is education, which is the right step. Sorry, Ken, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. That time is, it's an interesting thing. Way back when, I was against the BACnet standard because it was killing innovation. We were starting to see products coming out of the woodwork that were truly amazing and truly low cost, and they did amazing things that didn't happen within structure. So, and I think we're at that exact same stage, is that we need this rapid innovation and there needs to be no rules in rapid innovation. And then what we need to do is to see if you can make what it is you're doing stick and figure out how to, bring it into the camp, into the environment that it has to operate. But standards do somewhat create silos. So we have to be careful that you're not creating another silo with a standard. So trying to keep everything going as fast as it can and as being as innovative as it can is a hard thing to do.
It is, and you're describing what we've talked about here as sort of the IoT side of the industry in our world, right? And I know most of my adult life, I've worked either in my own company or at a small company that was doing innovative stuff. And I remember having conversations about, hey, should we implement this standard? Should we implement Haystack? Should we implement this other protocol or standard? And if the result of that was it's going to slow us down, it's going to raise our costs, it's going to increase the cost of the hardware, then we never did it, right? And I think that's true. And the winning innovations will find a way to come back around to interoperate, I believe, at some point in time, for sure, because they'll run out of ocean, right? They'll have to open it up to get to the clear blue ocean.
Yeah.
Good comment by Steve Dodson. Yes, we don't want to kill innovation, that's for sure. I'm involved in another chat thing, and it's interesting. They're dealing with the history of IoT, and they're sort of seeing that IoT is at the end of its thread as we move into cloud native, and they're almost talking the same transition we're talking between where we are now and how do we have to think different in cloud native and the implied AI that is part of that. The other thing I came across my desk is that AI is going to read everything that we've written by 2030, and then won't be able to get smarter than us, which because it basically is building its models from what we've been doing. So that's an interesting concept as well. It has the ability to absorb a whole bunch of information and use that. So we're in a very steep innovation curve, I think, and I simply said let's see where the rest of the herd is migrating.
But
Well,
I think
on
innovation, what we actually want to do is encourage it. Whatever, and a lot of what we do with IBB and other stuff is the architecture and all cloud native stuff is all about making it easier to innovate. And
it's interesting that IoT people think their world is coming to an end and they're migrating to cloud native. It sounds like you need to break out and dust off the great convergence banners again, Anto, from the back in the day. Maybe we're all headed towards and converging on cloud native. So here we go.
IoT is a silo, right?
I love that, the history of IoT. I don't think we even quite got there in our industry.
I know.
We can skip.
We're talking about last week or what?
We can skip a couple of steps.
Yeah, that's funny. Back in the day, back in 2019.
Yeah.
But I was going to go back to just one point that I think Tracy and I think Roger made, actually 2 points. One is the barriers. We have to be looking out for the barriers of this progress. And the other comment is about proprietary, and the fact that proprietary systems can be thought of as a silo. And if we make such a proprietary system / silo, interoperable, that actually then makes proprietary systems interoperable. Does that hurt anybody's heads?
No, it's system of systems. Everything becomes a component eventually, right?
Whether proprietary or not.
Yeah.
Because that then provides a way of vendors that have things that maybe they want to keep proprietary, as long as they have the right kind of interfaces, so other systems and other silos can actually interact with them through the standardized method, then it's okay. Doesn't really matter if it's proprietary or not.
I think I agree with that thinking, by the way, but I will say that I think there's a lot of fear. You know, a lot of what goes on in any industry is fear driven, right? And I think part of the issue is that companies fear that they are going to be commoditized, their hardware, their platforms, their solution. And whether that's true or not is obviously debatable, but that's part of the resistance that I hear from people and feel out there still. Instead of what you're saying, Anto, which is the innovation side of it, which is really what everyone should be thinking about. Yeah.
That's kind of the innovator's dilemma sort of notion, that if you're big, it's really difficult to innovate, which is obviously an advantage for smaller companies.
Yeah.
So is there anything missing from this list as we start to wrap up the call today?
Well, I think a recognition of what the drag is on making this happen in the industry, right? What's slowing it down? What are the speed bumps that we have to work our way through is an important part of this discussion as we go through. Rick said earlier, you know, one of the rules should be don't piss off Microsoft, Amazon, or Google, right? Well, that it's kind of in the same vein there, right? That's one of the parachutes dragging behind the vehicle here to slow things down.
Is that something like, I'm not quite sure I got the right words.
Yeah.
Make it so the solution is actually profitable, I'll use that word, for proprietary companies, something just like that.
There has to be a strong economic incentive. Yeah.
For everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right at the very top of this list, maybe needs to be something like that. You know, strong economic incentive for this.
All players.
Yeah.
That's good. That would add to this list very, very nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, another way of saying it, Anto, might be a low cost or a modest cost to participate. Right. So, because as I've been listening to all this, you know, the reluctance for various reasons for anyone in a silo to do what we're advocating for is the why, the investment cost. Yes, it all sounds good, but what's it going to cost me to do this? And if we do this in such a way that the amount of money that has to be spent by any one participant is minor to play ball, right? You have to make, as an example, if I understand what we're advocating for is the idea that you can run your application wherever you want, so you're not having to change that, but you need to adopt the methodology by which applications can talk to each other. Right? You do that. So we're not telling you you can't, you have to run in the building or you have to run in the cloud. We don't care, but you do have to support the interoperability method, whether it's connection profiles or something else that we end up with. And that investment to do that should be relatively minor.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, we're 4 minutes past, so I think we need to wrap. Thank you very much. This has been a great conversation, and we'll continue it next week, talking about how this can move forward from a cloud native perspective. So with that, hope everybody has a good week, great week, and we'll get a video of this out tomorrow or thereabouts. So bye all.
Thanks.
See you later.
Uh,
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
uh,
Cheers.